Welcome to another episode of Antinatalism Around the World. So today I'm joined with Haran and Nimrod, who are in Israel, and we're going to be talking about antinatalism in Israel. So I think we've got a lot to talk about, but before we get into everything, are you each both able to just give a brief introduction to yourselves and also how you first discovered antinatalism? Haran, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So it's nice to be on your show. My name is Haran. I live in Israel. I'm 34 years old. And I first came to know about antinatalism, I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I think, a website called the Human Extinction Movement,
Yeah.
and I read about them. So my first introduction was through that humans should go extinct in order to preserve nature. I have since come to have a more nuanced view. Nature is not really the focus of my antinatalism. I,
Mm.
my philosophy is that as moral agents in this world, uh, we have a moral obligation to reduce suffering whenever we can. And when there are no living things left, that is when no suffering can occur. So that is how I view. I think that's how I connect to antinatalism. I I don't. I advocate for people to have as little as few children as they can,
Mm.
and I myself do not have children, and I do not advocate for more people to come into this world. It's not something that I deal with on a daily basis like Nimrod. I don't have any. I don't have much activism that is especially related to antinatalism,
Mm.
although I do take part in activism that is, let's say, it has to do with reducing suffering. Yes, whether it's reducing inequality or whether it's advocating for smaller families and family planning.
Mm.
That is how I try to contribute to my society. And I usually don't talk about antinatalism with anyone in the activism community because, as you probably guess, it's taboo. In Israel, more so than around the world, because having children is like a big thing. You need to have many children.
Mm.
And just saying that I advocate for families with two children is already a big thing. So that's talking about more than that might offend people even more.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely think in terms of activism, I think it's a completely valid way to spend your time advocating for things that align with antinatalism. So, for example, there are many things someone can do that reduce birth rates without actually explicitly talking about antinatalism. So, I think those are also, perfectly worthwhile endeavors. And then Nimrod,
Yeah.
so are you able to? How did you come across antinatalism and brief introduction about yourself, and maybe everyone can see the signs in the background. Sort of
Yeah.
what are those signs, and what do you do with them?
Well, if I may, um, I want to start with kind of a personal story.
Yeah.
I remember your personal story that you told Amanda in the Story Antinatalism podcast about kind of a snap moment that you had regarding animal rights, watching the
Yeah.
dog while you are cooking. So it came to me that we are 3 days away from a very important day in Israel tradition, in Israel, in a Jewish tradition, sorry, in Jewish religion, which is called Yom Kippur, which I guess can be translated to English as Atonement Day. A day you are supposed to atone your sins and reflect on your relationship with God, with yourself, and with other people. Actually, it's the summit. It's the peak of 10 days that you are supposed to do kind of introspection. And 28 years ago, it's a fasting day that some people spend talking and going to the synagogue, meeting each other to pass the time while not eating, and make it easier for them because they don't eat and don't drink. But they don't really do what they are supposed to do, and that is kind of soul searching or introspection or reflecting over their lives. So when I was 17, it's 28 years ago, I'm 45 now, I thought to myself, it was 1995, so no internet, no smartphones, no TV broadcasts, so it was a great opportunity to do an introspection. So I remember myself lying on bed and just thinking, and thinking about my relationship with God and with myself and with life and etc. And ironically, the first thing that went away, that disappeared from my life, thinking about God, I did a good job thinking about my relationship with Him, is to lose God. So I became an atheist that day, and in kind of a domino effect, many other things have. I started to question and to doubt all kinds of things in my life and in life in general. It wasn't so personal. And I guess that was the point, mainly because I thought that I realized that life is purposeless and goalless, and there was nothing to achieve in life, and it's meaningless in the sense of cosmic meaning, not in the sense of individual life are meaningless, obviously. And I think that is the point where it snapped. That I just thought to myself that it's crazy that the most crucial decision in my life, it wasn't me who made it. And not only that I didn't choose to be created, to exist, I didn't choose any of the circumstances, the conditions of my creation that ended up shaping who I am, the person I am. And I think it's kind of crazy. The only reason that people get it as plain, as self-evident, it's because it is self-evident and it's the only way to create people, but it's still very wrong and something that at least drives and requires serious thinking. That we didn't choose to exist or anything about our creation and the circumstances of our creation. So I was against the production pretty much back then, but I encountered the word. I realized that there is a term to the moral opposition to procreation, and it's antinatalism. Obviously, about 10 years ago, watching Imandam's videos on YouTube, and then I realized it's actually a term. And then I was introduced to Better Never to Have Been, David Berntal's book, and I read it, and that's practically it. I became officially an antinatalist, and not only against morally opposing procreation.
Yeah, sorry, go.
No, I think that sums this kind of my snapping moment. Continues for a day, but it kind of relates to your moment on a different area of activism and morality.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that story as well. So getting on to Israel. So Haran already kind of mentioned this, but like, what do you both think the culture is like in Israel when it comes to discussing controversial ideas like antinatalism? Is there a relatively open sort of forum in the culture for, people are quite open to discussing controversial ideas like this? Or is the culture more sort of conservative and it doesn't really allow much discussion of topics like that? Either of you can go first.
Go ahead, Nimrod.
Okay. Well, like everything in Israel, everything is complex. It's very complex, and there are all kinds of different strata of society. As you probably know, for the passing year, more accurately, the passing 9 months, the Israeli society is in kind of a crisis, a major crisis,
Yeah.
kind of existential crisis, and a lot of issues are being it crosses it's more than a political dispute. It's a social dispute. It has a very strong religious angle. So in a way, what let me say that I wasn't talking about how I started to my antinatalism activism. Maybe we'll get into it later, but I'll jump into it right now. That I delayed my decision to go out to the streets, so to speak, to start antinatalism and grassroots activism because that the Israeli society attention, people's attention is directed now to the judicial reform and to the demonstration against judicial reform. And I wasn't sure how this message will be accepted during this time. So that was one of the reasons why I decided to
Yeah.
delay my activism, kind of the forming the Israeli anti-natalism movement. But to my surprise, I'm doing it for 5 months from today. Today it's 5 months since I started, and people are way more open than I expected. And I think
Mm.
there is kind of relation. It is connected to the fact that for 33 weeks in a row, people are going to demonstrations, and many people, are going more than once a week to the big demonstration in Tel Aviv and all kinds of places. So um, the liberal parts, but there are many downsides, obviously, to this judicial reform. That goes without saying, but the silver lining that I'm seeing, which is amazing to me, is that the more liberal parts of Israel society have woken up. They are awake now, and they are mad, and they are alert, and that is also, besides the downsides, the obvious downsides, that is an opportunity to talk to them about all kinds of things, to kind of rearrange their values in other surfaces as well. I'm also doing animal rights activism during
Mm.
these protests. Maybe we'll touch it later. And people are rather accepting and open to different messages during and among the demonstrations that are directed into supposedly a different place. I'm trying to connect the things. I'm not doing anti-natalism advocacy in these demonstrations, not at all. But the times that the more liberal parts of Israel are awake now is an opportunity chance. It's an opportunity moment to talk to them about
Mm.
other things as well. Obviously, they are my target audience, and the more conservative side and the religious people are a much tougher challenge. But surprisingly, it's the conversations are much better, much deeper, and more significant than I thought. Again, maybe I will touch it. I'll touch it later. Maybe you want to ask Haran a little bit more about the culture in Israel. Maybe I
Mm.
will talk a little bit more about the responses and how the conversation looks like. So
Mm.
sorry.
Yeah, Haran, do you have anything to add about the culture in general, and about any experiences that you've had that has shaped your understanding of how the culture is, how open it is to antinatalism?
There's a big difference between what I know about the general public and what I experience in my small bubble.
Right. Yeah.
My
Yeah. Yeah.
small bubble is relatively liberal, and I don't feel I'm not discouraged from voicing my opinion, at least to
Mm.
the, let's say, students I study with at university, or my parents or my friends. I talk with them freely about what I think. They know I am against procreation, and I tell them the reasons why. Some of them understand it, some of them do not. But even those who do understand, most of them do intend to have children
Mm.
because just because. So and while I do know some people who do not have children and don't intend to, it's usually not because they wish to end suffering in the world, and
Yeah.
they don't have an antinatalist view. They just don't want it for themselves.
Mm.
But those are few and far between. The general public in Israel is very conservative when it comes to having children. It's like an obligation to have at least 3 children, and those are the liberal families.
Mm.
The more conservative families, the more religious families have 4, 5, 6, even sometimes even more, and that's considered normal. Even though Israel is, I think, by most standards, considered a developed state,
Mm.
but when it comes to our reproduction rate, we are very much in the past, and
Mm.
that's a big problem in Israel. And it's hard work to convince people otherwise. So, as I said in the beginning, talking directly about antinatalism is out of the question. But I do take part in advocacy for family planning, for
Mm.
smaller families, for the sake of everyone's quality of life. And that's a first step. That's a significant first step, and that's something I feel I can contribute to, and it's something that I do on a daily basis. It's part of my life.
Mm. So,
Uh,
oh, sorry, go on, Haran.
no, I just say that it has on the surface. My activism has nothing to do with antinatalism.
Mm. So, I was actually going to ask about this later on, but since you've brought it up, I'll ask it now. So, I'm sure. I think you kind of implied this already, Haran, but um, there's a narrative that is starting to rise in developed countries that birth rates are going below replacement rate, and this is going to be, a big issue. It's going to be a key issue for governments and elections in the future as we have aging population, stuff like this. But as you said, Israel is considered a developed nation, but it's bucking the trend in that it still has a birth rate above the replacement rate, and there are still quite a lot of people who have big families. So it seems to be much more pro-natalist than other countries that have had a reduction in birth rate as they've become wealthier. Um, wh- why do you two think that is? Why do you think Israel specifically is so pro-natalist? I've There's another guy I know who's Israeli and anti-natalist, but he didn't want to come on the interview because he didn't want to be public. But he was saying that he believes it has something to do with the fact that it's still quite a strong religious country. Um, and also, he says that he thinks there's a connection with the historical legacy of the Holocaust, in that, if we do not have kids, then Hitler has won, sort of thing. But also, demographic wars. Obviously, Israel is quite well known around the world for being in a situation of conflict. And so maybe there's this narrative of like, we need to have kids to maintain the nation, stuff like this. So what are your guys' opinion on this? Do you think that those are valid reason, that those are like correct assessments for why Israel is so pro-natalist, or do you think there's other reasons?
I think this is a very good assessment of what people think is causing the birth rate.
Mm.
It's what people use as, let's say, an excuse.
Yeah.
But in fact, it it is it's a political issue. Uh, long ago, long ago in the history of Israel, which does not exist for that long,
Mm.
but the government in the 50s decided to be pro-natalist for the many reasons you said. for religious reasons, for a demographic war, let's say, against the Arabs, and to replenish those who died in the Holocaust, etc. The problem is, nowadays those things are completely irrelevant. All the Jews that have died in the Holocaust have been replaced and then some. There is no demographic war because the Arabs are behaving like normal people, because they get richer and they have a declining birth rate like everywhere else in the world. So that is a non-issue. And the religious argument is also not true, because there were religious people, very religious people, ultra-Orthodox, back in the day, before there was pro-natalist public policy, and they had 2 or 3 children. But because of the public policy that was enacted since the 50s and has not changed, religious people have 5 or 6 children and even upwards, and even non-religious have 3 children, and that has a lot to do with pro-natalist policy by the government, which has not changed for many years. It is they advocate for it in every way possible, and the most effective way is through economic benefits or economic incentives. There are still many economic incentives that the government provides to have large families. And this is going to cause us a lot of trouble in the future. Yeah, I'm talking regardless of my antinatalist beliefs. Israel is heading for a demographic explosion, and our economy will not survive it. Israel may, in the future, in 20 years, when we have 20 million people living in this small place, we might be considered a developing nation rather than a developed one, as we are now.
Mm. And Nimrod, what are your thoughts on the sort of pro-natalist state of Israel?
Well, first of all, I agree that Israel is a pro-natalist country. Uh, However, I'm a little bit surprised. I was expecting many counter arguments to my antinatalistic arguments. By the way, I'm not talking about population explosion or reasons to reduce the population because of climate change or environmental issues or child-free or anything like that. I'm talking about antinatalism. I'm using antinatalist arguments with people such as that procreation is selfish, that the consent argument, risk, gamble, having others, obviously, which is my main motive, main arguments such as these. And I'm surprised that I'm not hearing much more. I was expecting the demographic argument, the security, the famous security argument that you mentioned. And I don't hear it that much. And I think it relates to the fact that I'm talking to them about antinatalism and not about population reduction. I'm talking to them in universal notions and moral arguments, and they are coming through. They are trying to counter my arguments more or less in the same realm. So we are having quite quickly. We are having kind of a philosophical debate on the street about antinatalism. And I was expecting something else. I was expecting to hear a lot of many religious arguments and the demographic arguments of this sort. Having said that, almost all my activism was in Tel Aviv, which is the most liberal city in Israel. But I was speaking with a lot of religious people because I'm not approaching people. I'm not cherry picking them. I'm standing with my signs. I'm trying to find to choose obviously a relatively crowded place, so as many people would see me. But I'm not approaching people. I'm not handing leaflets. I'm not trying to start a conversation. I'm let them come to me. And when they do come to me, we are having an antinatalism discussion. To my surprise, I hope this course will continue because obviously I'm in a disadvantage regarding the religious argument, because when someone tells me God told me that I should procreate, obviously it's harder for me to counter that argument. By the way, usually my reply is that you may choose your religion and your convictions and your God for yourself and for yourself only. You can choose to do actions or to avoid doing actions that impact you. You are not allowed, and your religion is not allowed to let you force actions on others. And reproduction, procreation, creating other people is there affecting others. It's literally creating another person. And so, if you think that your religion permits you to so severely, so crucially affect someone else, either you don't understand your religion correctly, or that your religion doesn't understand what it means to do the right thing, not to force yourself and your convictions on someone else. This is more or less a short version of my reply to the religious argument. But again, surprisingly, I do not encounter these kind of arguments that often. And again, I think maybe it relates to the fact that I'm talking to them about antinatalism. And by the way, unless you want to continue this line of thought, or can I jump to kind of what is my goal when I'm having a conversation about antinatalism, kind of a street activism? So,
So
stop me if. Okay, sure.
No, it's all good. Because I was actually going to now ask you about that. So my next question was going to be about so you have recently started to, obviously you've already kind of referred to this multiple times, but just for anyone who's watching who hasn't fully got it yet. So you have decided to go out on the streets of Tel Aviv, and you either hold signs, which you've got some examples of in the background, and you're wearing a t-shirt, or you have the signs like laid out against a wall or something like that, and you basically allow people to approach you because they're intrigued by your signs, and then you have a conversation with them about antinatalism, and you've started to put pictures and videos on social media and on YouTube as well. And obviously I'll link some examples in the description so anyone can find those. But yeah, what first made you want to go out on the streets? What made you take that step and do that?
Well, I've been an animal rights activist for more than 20 years. And my motive, my main motive and reason, the main motive behind my antinatalism is the suffering, like more or less basically what Haran said in the beginning. Maybe if it's okay, I will read just two quick sentences that I think capture my the way I view antinatalism, because I relate to all the arguments more or less. The suffering part, which is my main motive. In a nutshell, it's people should avoid procreation in order to prevent the harm that will be caused to those who will be created and by those who will be created. Since it's never necessary to create someone, but it's always necessary that the created person experience some harm and cause some harm to others, to create someone is always to cause unnecessary harm. And causing unnecessary harm is immoral. So this is in a nutshell, the main motivation to my antinatalism conceptually. But the reason that I wanted to do street activism is there are the grassroots, the street activism, so to speak, and animal rights activism in general in Israel is quite developed. There are many activists and groups, and so after a while of doing that, I decided that since no one really talks about procreation and definitely not talking about the moral imposition, the moral opposition, sorry, of the imposition of procreation, but they are talking about other things, including animal rights activism. Um, I wanted to do that, to talk to people about anti-natalism, to try and do that. Israel is a great challenge. It's a very pro-natalist and family-oriented, no matter if you're Orthodox or not, if you are more liberal, as Haran said. Um, and so it's a challenge. So I had my doubts, and the timing wasn't perfect either. I approached a few people in all kinds of child-free communities and a little bit in animal rights organizations and environmental organizations, because I didn't want to act alone. I didn't want to be kind of a solo operation, obviously. But no one answered, no one replied. I waited a little bit more, and in the meantime, I wrote arguments. I started to work on a website, on a Facebook page, and start thinking about slogans for the signs and stuff like that, and waited for people to come to join me, but they didn't. So on again exactly 5 months ago on Earth Day, April 21st, I decided to just go out solo and start my antinatalism activism. A couple of groups of animal rights organizations have decided to conduct a march emphasizing factory farming in relation to climate change and environmental issues on Earth Day. So I joined them with 4 signs. One of them is simply the Israeli Antinatalist movement. That's the big one here. Another one is simply don't procreate, plain and simple. Another one is people are causing a lot of suffering. And the last one I'm not sure it will be translated into English very well. It sounds better in Hebrew, but it's more or less, it won't be over unless we all have a vasectomy. Something like that. It sounds better in Hebrew.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just went out there and as you said, I uploaded a few photos and started the website and the Facebook page, but still people didn't follow. People haven't joined. Sorry.
What have the conversations you've had been like in general? And like what are your goals for your activism?
Yeah. I will divide the answer into two. So my goal, as opposed to animal rights activism, where the bar can be much higher, meaning it's absolutely realistic to expect you from yourself as an activist, that after a conversation, someone will seriously consider going vegan. It's a realistic expectation, certainly in 2023. Sorry. This is not my expectation and not my goal when I'm speaking with people about antinatalism. I want to initiate a doubt, a thinking process. I want the idea to be out there. I want people to know. People don't know what this word means. That's why it's important that I will show up with a shirt that the word antinatalism is written on it, because people don't even know that there is a word for this position, or even that there is a moral that some people are morally against procreation. That it's a thing, that it's an idea, it's a notion, it's a philosophy. So my standards are rather low. My goal is that everyone who starts a conversation, probably thinking that it's a little bit weird, that it's different, that maybe I don't know, bored or delusional, will end up, the conversation will end up, he will go away to the rest of his day or her day, thinking, okay, there is a point to this
Yeah.
idea. It's not weird, it's not delusional, it's not crazy. It actually makes sense. I don't expect them to be convinced. Obviously, it can't happen in a few minutes conversation. Even if I give them some kind of a leaflet or they're going to the website, I don't have that expectation. But it needs to be started. We have to start talking about it, to put it out there.
Yeah.
So this is my goal, and this is where my standard is placed, and and so far it's working out better than I thought. People do leave the conversation thinking, okay, this is a serious issue. I get it. It's a valid point. Probably don't disagree. Don't agree. Sorry, still disagree, but think that they at least they think that they need to take antinatalism seriously. So in that perspective, this is a good conversation under my
Yeah.
current standards. Sorry.
No, no. I was just going to say. I think you're right to have something like that as a goal, because I think if if someone was doing the same thing as you, but they had their standard as, I have to convince this person to be antinatalist here and now, it would probably lead them to get very frustrated. And so it would probably cause a lot of their conversations to actually not go that well, and it could push people away from antinatalism. But if you lower the bar as you've done and say, I just want to get them to recognize that this is highlighting a valid issue, I think that's a really good bar to set, given the current, like, world we're in, where most people are not going to agree with us. It's good to just get them to recognize it as a valid issue, because now they're going to go with a deeper understanding of it. They're going to leave the conversation with a deeper understanding of it, and likely a positive interaction with someone who believes it. And so if they ever come across antinatalism again, they're going to be in a position where they are likely more receptive, because they understand it as a valid issue and they've had a previous experience that was positive, rather than thinking it's stupid and having a negative experience, which means when they next come across it, they're maybe just going to not even read the thing or watch the thing or whatever. So I think it's quite smart of you to have I think it's quite smart of you to have that as a goal. Haran, I wanted to ask you now about so you gave a talk about antinatalism a few years ago. I can't remember how many years ago now, but it's available on YouTube. But it's in Hebrew. So and I, I I've been able to watch a translated version, but I don't know if the translation is public and available. But if it isn't, hopefully it'll be made available soon. But like where did you give that talk, and like how did you get the opportunity to give it?
So first, I would like to say that I really appreciate Nimrod's activism. This
Mm,
is, I just love it that people are going to hear about antinatalism and going to speak about it and in a calm manner. And yeah, that's a start. That's how you make people consider something that they've never thought about. And that is just great. I think
mm,
you're doing a very good job. Regarding my talk, I think it was in an anime convention, possibly.
mm,
Was it wasn't I wasn't being in a it wasn't a talk about philosophy or about public policy
yeah,
or about what we actually are going to do. I mostly spoke about it in the context of entertainment.
yeah,
But again, I was when I was speaking about, I was thinking about starting some thought process in the people who would hear me, that they might consider this as they'll hear about it and maybe they'll think about it further. Because in most places, if you come and you say, I want to talk about not having children, no one's gonna let you up on stage.
Mm.
But if you talk about some form of entertainment and inject it as a kind of storytelling mechanic, I don't know how to call it, then people might think, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we can write a story about that. And that also means they're going to think about what it actually means. So that was many years ago. I don't think I would have given a similar talk today. I'm not that involved in that community anymore, and also because I'm taking part in local politics, I don't want to be how should I say? I don't want people to involve me or to see me as someone who is involved with antinatalism.
Yeah.
But still, this talk you're speaking about, I think someone translated it and sent me that translation a while ago, and I haven't uploaded the translation yet. I should probably do it.
Well, if you do, send me the link and I'll include it in the description of the video so people can find it. But it so when I watched it, it was really interesting because, like, obviously being an antinatalist, like if an antinatalist watches your talk, they're not necessarily going to learn new information because they kind of already know all the arguments and stuff already. But you the structure of the talk and the setting of the talk was really interesting. So if I'm remembering correctly, what you did is you started out by talking about bad guys in comics and anime.
I think I was talking about scenarios in anime or storytelling where the human race goes extinct or there's a world-ending cataclysm. And then I started talking about how we always think about the end of the world as the bad thing that happened in the story. What if we think about it as the good thing that happens in the story?
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting way to structure the talk, given who you were talking to, because obviously people are going to be interested in, oh, okay, well, this guy, he's talking about bad guys in this, in anime and stuff that we're interested in, but he's kind of flipping it on his head. So he's saying bad guys often are associated with like the end of the world, stuff like this. And we just assume that's a bad thing. But what if it actually isn't? And then you take them into the topic of antinatalism. And I thought that was like quite an inventive way of giving the talk. So I really enjoyed that. And, I think like, I congratulate you on coming up with such like an inventive way to.
Yes, back then, I think it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Back then, I was really into spreading the word about antinatalism, and I looked for every opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
And so that was a good opportunity, I think. And still, I think some people really objected once they've heard my talk.
Right.
Some people very much objected and barred me from ever making talks in such conventions again in Israel.
Oh, really? Is this people in the audience or the organizers
Yes,
of the
people in
event?
I think it was people in the audience who might have been connected to the organizers of some conventions in Israel. So yeah, after I gave this talk, I don't think I was invited to give more talks in similar conventions.
Oh no. What was the obviously that is a reaction from certain people in the audience. What other reactions did you get? Did you get any positive reactions as well?
Yes, I did. from both the organizers and the audience. People were actually very interested. They say it was interesting. It was something they've never thought about. Um, yeah, I think just like Nimrod described, people want to talk about this, about the philosophy, about the rationale behind it. It's interesting to them, and I think, as you say, it was for them also a surprising or creative way to talk about something that we don't think about.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. What has both of your experiences been talking about antinatalism more in your personal lives with your friends and family? Obviously, only share what you're comfortable with sharing. But what have those conversations be like? Have you spoken to family and personal friends about antinatalism, and what's it been like? Maybe Nimrod, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first because it will be very quick. All my friends are from the animal rights community, so
Yeah.
most of them are antinatalists themselves. So it's not
Right.
really an issue. It's almost obvious because the connection between veganism, animal rights, and antinatalism is not only obvious. It's
Mm,
mandatory. You can't really be an antinatalist, a non-vegan antinatalist. I know there are
mm,
many antinatalists who are non-vegans, but it's beyond me. I can't understand how you can actively support the creation of a new life of procreation, um, that of a life that will be miserable from day one to the murder day, from birth to death. This is pronatalism and of the most miserable life I can imagine. So I don't think there is
mm,
such a thing as a non-vegan antinatalist. I know they're calling themselves. I'm sorry, that's unrelated to the question. I get back to it in a
No, no,
moment.
no.
They're calling themselves anthropocentric antinatalists, but they
Mm,
are speciesist antinatalists. They just disregard sentient beings from other species, animals for
mm,
other species. It's speciesism. It's speciesist antinatalism. So I don't really have friends outside of this community, so it's not really an issue. And in family, everybody's already. But they called me Nimrod. My parents. The Hebrew translation, by the way, is "we will rebel." So um, I guess I was um, signed up for this mission by my
yeah,
parents.
yeah,
Uh, so this is my experience.
yeah,
I'm not really talking with strangers about it.
yeah,
Sorry, I'm talking about the strangers all the time because I'm doing the
yeah.
street activism, but not with
But
the
friends and family, yeah,
acquaintances.
I get what you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, and it's also, what you were saying before is a valid point as well, because a lot of people, when they talk about antinatalism, they say that it's the view that you should not procreate. But I think more accurately, it's the view that you should not be bringing new beings into existence, right? And obviously, most notably, that's procreation. That's the most commonly talked about thing. But a potential child of yours is only one possible being that you have control over whether you bring them into existence or not. Another way is through your lifestyle, diet, etc. There are many other things that someone can do besides just personally having a child that will cause other beings to come into existence. So I totally get your observation. Um, Haran, what's your experience been like talking to friends and family, if you have at all?
Well, first, I would like to say that my view of antinatalism really started just as don't have children,
Mm,
but it has become today don't um, don't make any life, and
mm,
we should strive for a world with no life at all of any species.
mm,
So this is kind of how my belief evolved.
mm,
In my personal life, I'm kind of in a small liberal bubble. And while I know few people who outright agree with my views, I have talked about my views with family and friends, and sometimes we had arguments and they disagreed, and I tried to convince them why I'm right, and they tried to convince me why what I'm thinking is completely bonkers.
Mm.
But since I don't have much in my small bubble, I don't have much contact with very religious people or very conservative people. It hasn't been much of a problem.
Mm.
I felt very free to express my views about everything, and that includes women's rights and LGBT rights, and also antinatalism. But
And
in general,
sorry, go on.
no, I think I'm just repeating myself that in general, Israel is very pro-natalist outside of
Mm.
my small circle.
Yeah. No, no, no. I 100% get it. Um, so we've already kind of spoken about. You guys have said that, or Nimrod was saying that um, at the moment Israel is going through a process of I don't know what the word you would call it is, unrest, or a bit of some political turmoil. And Nimrod was
Chaos.
saying that, yeah, chaos. And Nimrod was saying that this chaos has caused people to perhaps, well, or certain people in Israel to perhaps become more open to antinatalism, right? As a result of the political situation. Besides that, are there any political trends or laws or movements or anything like that in Israel that are relevant to antinatalism and procreation?
Well, the sort of how can I say, the sort of advocacy that Nimrod and I do are completely different.
Mm,
I think maybe uh, years ago, when I was really involved in trying to get my message to as many people as possible, I I would have done things. Well, I didn't go out to the street like Nimrod does, which good on you. You're braver than I am. Um, but I would have joined you. I think if I saw someone back then that was doing what you're doing, I would have joined you. But today, I'm more focused in changing public policy. And yes, in today's turmoil, in today's changing environment, there is, I think, a move towards liberalism, towards
mm,
being a more developed country with more developed ideals and values, and that includes uh, changing the policy for changing the pro-natalist policy that we've had for many years. And so uh, I think this is an opportunity to convince people that we should change this kind of policy in the future. Hopefully, we can change the current government and bring along people who are more in line with what the majority of Israelis want, and that hopefully they will reduce the incentives for large families
mm.
and put us on a path that is better for everyone, I think, and also a path that means that we will have less living beings brought into existence.
Mm. And Nimrod, do you have anything to add about? Do you see any sort of anything going on in Israeli politics that is relevant to antinatalism?
Unfortunately, in Israel, despite that it being what is considered a hotspot in climate crisis relation, meaning that um, things that will have effects of the climate crisis will be kind of doubled in Israel. That's, if I'm not mistaken, is the meaning of an area being a hotspot. Despite that, the somehow this issue, the climate crisis, is not being taken seriously in Israel. Environmentalism in Israel, in general, is kind of a weak issue. not sure why. I guess because everything is related. Everything is related to the security issue and to the Israeli-Palestine conflict, and so other things are set aside. Climate crisis as well, despite that Israel is a hotspot. And I'm mentioning it because obviously this is not my getaway. I'm not talking about procreation through the climate crisis, but obviously it is, and it can be in other places in the world. It is, or it already is, a kind of a foot at the door, so to speak. It is a getaway. It's a good way to start a conversation about that and to start doubting and criticizing more than the something deeper than in what kind of a world I'm going to create children. But thinking about the consequences of our actions to future generations. So it's a kind of thinking process that I think happens in other places, but in Israel not really. Environmental organizations in Israel do not talk about procreation, not even about reducing procreation. At least most of them. There is some kind of organization which is more in the academic sphere. It's called in Hebrew it's called tzafuf. It's like crowded. It can be crowded. And in a way, my strategic perception is that I will be the radical guy, and people will kind of meet me in the middle, and then the conversation about reducing the number of created people will be in a much more ambition starting point than if there was no radicalization or radical notions about procreation, which is antinatalism and the things I'm trying to do. So in a way, I'm trying to mark the more radical and ambition aspirative border line, so the majority of people will meet other organizations in the middle. So this is kind of my strategic note about why my activism.
Yeah. So, sorry,
yes,
go on.
Now, so you mentioned the organizations, the environmental organizations, and you mentioned Tzafuf. By the way, I'm part of Tzafuf's management. It's a small organization that deals specifically with the trouble of large population growth. And I run some of its activity. And one of the things we try to do is engage other organizations, such as organizations that deal with the environment and organizations that deal with family planning and organizations that deal with poverty, but mostly environmental organizations. And we want them to start talking about the problem of excessive population growth. But in Israel, nobody wants to talk about it because it's politically taboo, you can say. So, and I think this is why we are having trouble. Also, we are a small organization, we have a small voice, and the large organizations that deal with the environment and that should be aware of the problems that population growth are causing, they don't want to talk about it. They're trying to avoid the issue, even though it's central to the environmental issue.
And I can't. We mentioned him before, but I can't remember if it was on or off the recording. But I'm sure you've both heard of Yuval Noah Harari. He's a well-known author around the world, an intellectual, and he's a vegan. He even wrote a foreword to Animal, one of the editions of Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. His ethics seem to be quite focused on suffering, and I've made a video about him before because there was an interview he did where he was asked by the interviewer if he would ever have kids, um, and he was talking. He talked about how um, he he doesn't think it's responsible to bring someone into a world that you don't fully understand. The world is such a complicated place with so much harm being done in it, and he was saying like he doesn't understand it. Even him, as a very educated, very intelligent person who thinks deeply about these issues, which most people don't, he doesn't understand the world. And so what right does he have to put someone in a world that he doesn't understand? But also he mentioned that if he created someone, he would also be responsible for their death. And he said that that was too much of a burden for him. He didn't want to be responsible for someone else's death. And so whilst he hasn't explicitly said that he is antinatalist, um, it seems like the sentiment is there, and it seems like he's somewhat close to it. Um, and obviously, the reason I'm bringing this up is because he's from Israel. He's Israeli. Do you think that there are many antinatalists in Israel? Obviously, there are not loads of antinatalists in any country, but relatively speaking, do you think that Israel has a high proportion of antinatalists compared to other countries?
I think that it doesn't. There is a quite large child-free community on Facebook, and I think I'm pretty sure they're meeting physically every once in a while. In fact, the administrator of one of the groups, one of the most popular and biggest groups, gave an interview on a mainstream media show just a few days ago, this week. It was kind of a panel show, and she had a very short time to express her opinions. So it didn't went well, but not because of her. I think she did a very good job with the poor conditions that she got. Because as a panel show, they're throwing questions and there are brilliant notes that they very well thought of. I thought to myself, I'm glad that David Benatar doesn't understand Hebrew because he'll probably take everything back after hearing their arguments. So there is a quite large child-free community. I'm not aware of the antinatalism community. I would like to start one myself or join one if there is one, but I'm not aware of a community like that. Of such character. Regarding Yuval Noah Harari, I share your assessment that he is an antinatalist. I think that the causing someone else death is a very deep argument that is not intuitive, and I'm trying to use it on the streets, take it to the streets, so to speak, and it doesn't work as well as other arguments so far. Maybe I'm not doing it good enough. Maybe it's me as an advocate, but because I think it's a great argument. So maybe I should sharpen my tools, but it is a deep argument. So I'm glad to hear. I didn't know that he used this argument. I know that he's at least sympathetic to antinatalism. I didn't know he is using this argument, and I'm glad to hear it because it's a deep and it makes one think. Besides that, he's a very popular and quite liked figure in Israel. Maybe in the last year a little bit less because he supports the demonstration side and Israel is very divided right now. But at least until 9 months from now, he was a very popular character.
Yeah, there are a few people in the world that are very popular, are vegan, and also seem to have antinatalist sentiments. There's Yuval Noah Harari, and there's also Ricky Gervais, the comedian. He also seems to be on the same wavelength. And there are a few other people as well, but they're maybe slightly less known. Yeah, Haran, did you have anything else to add on whether there's many antinatalists in Israel or?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I would guess no.
Yeah.
But it's also possible that people do not express their actual beliefs
true.
because of societal pressures. Yeah, I know I've spoken to many religious people who will, in private, tell me that they support my ideals of freedom of religion, but they will not dare voice it in their community.
Right.
So it's possible that there are people who agree with antinatalism, but will not say so publicly.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, no, I 100% get you, and I think that's the case in quite a lot of countries. Um, so there was actually, so I might not get all the details of this correct because I was not there. But from what I've seen online, there is a center in Israel called the Center for Political and Moral Philosophy. I would assume it's attached to a university in Israel somewhere because it sounds like the sort of center that would be attached to a university. Um, anyway, so each year they host some sort of conference event around a specific topic, and this year the topic of the conference was the value of human life, and it included a talk on antinatalism. Um, now the conference was in person. It wasn't recorded. Or actually, I'm not sure if it was in person, but it wasn't recorded anyway. So I wasn't able to access it, and I am not able to access it after the fact either because it wasn't recorded. Um, but it does seem like there is discussion going on about antinatalism in certain circles in Israel. Have either of you seen any discussion of antinatalism in any of the media in Israel, like on a radio, in the newspaper, on TV, or anything like that? Haran, do you want to go first if you've seen anything?
Actually, I have no idea. I didn't know about the conference you were talking about. Sounds interesting and surprising. And also, I think it was never discussed on any media, and I don't know if anywhere else in the world it was discussed on mainstream media. I do know that child-free people have voiced their thoughts and opinions in the media before,
Mm,
but not specifically the view that bringing life is causing harm,
yeah.
like the basic concept of antinatalism.
Mm. And what about you, Nimrod? Have you seen anything in the media at all about antinatalism, or it's not been mentioned?
No, not about antinatalism. As I mentioned earlier, the administrator of a child-free community was interviewed in a mainstream media panel just a few days ago, and last week there was a written piece in the paper um, about people who choose to create fewer people due to the climate crisis, but
Mm,
there was no mention of people who refuse to create people, not
yeah.
because of the climate change, not for other reasons. In both cases, in the very short, unfortunately, interview and in this newspaper, and I also didn't hear about, haven't heard about the conference that you mentioned. If it's some kind of a closed fin academic convention that only people from the academy or from this specific school can attend to, so it's not relevant for me. But
Mm,
I would be delighted to speak in such a conference. So I will look it up. If you have
mm.
a link to this event, and you can send me. That will be great. I'm trying to locate it and
Yeah,
maybe.
I'll find the link again and I'll send it to you, and also I'll include it in the description as well, for people to look at.
Okay.
It wasn't that the whole conference wasn't about antinatalism. It was just
Yeah,
that I think there was one specific talk on it, but the whole conference generally was about the topic of human life. So
yeah.
a lot of it will probably be of interest to antinatalists. Um,
But
I've
by
got
the
a
way,
couple. I know. Sorry, go on.
sorry, I did attend an academic course just as a guest. I wasn't a student about population ethics,
Right.
and David Benatar was briefly mentioned by me asking a question, and that's it. nothing about antinatalism or even not about the value of human life, which sounds interesting, or a little bit about death, and through questions about death, there was some kind of a discussion about non-existence, but not in the perspective of not creating people. So even population ethics, so it's quite disappointing. Maybe now it was more than 10 years ago. Maybe now they are discussing this issue.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it'll be more discussed in classes like that in the future, because I also read a book recently about this thing called long-termism, which is it's basically the idea that we should have a very long-term future with lots of people in it. And you would think that in a book like that, the author would talk about antinatalism and, contend with it somewhat and think about the arguments. But antinatalism was mentioned in 2 sentences. Um, and you'd think that if you're writing a book on the future, it's a pretty big question as to whether there should be a future or not, right? So it seems like it would be a pretty key question, but antinatalism wasn't really mentioned. Um, so I've only got a couple questions left because I know I've had you both for quite a long time. So my one of my last questions is, do you think that there is a potential for a antinatalist community or a strong antinatalist movement in Israel, the same way that it seems like there's quite a strong vegan community and animal rights movement? Because I remember, I'm not sure if both of you know of him, but Gary Yourofsky, he's quite a well-known animal rights activist, and he's Jewish, but I believe he was born and raised in America, or at least he lives in America. I don't know if he was born there, but he went to Israel to give some talks and some media interviews, and they did really well. Um, and I often hear him credited for the popularity of veganism in Israel because he was very influential. So it does seem like there is potential for people in Israel to adopt views that are quite outside of the mainstream and are based around compassion, empathy, suffering. Um, do you think there is a similar potential for an antinatalist community and movement in Israel, or do you think it's going to be very difficult to form something like that?
I think the potential does exist. I think the potential exists in most places,
Mm,
and I see the liberal community and the atheist community and the vegan community, and I think that some of those people are in alignment with antinatalist ideas.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree. I think there are a lot of people who hold ideas that are compatible and aligned with antinatalism, but they just haven't necessarily heard of it, or they just haven't had like a level-headed conversation about it. A reasonable conversation about it. What are your views, Nimrod?
I agree with both of you that there is a potential in Israel, especially in relation to the animal rights community and the vegan community, which is relatively develops and quite popular in Israel. That means in activism as well, not only just people being vegan. Um, and I guess you can divide the animal rights community, very generally speaking, and in relation to the collaboration with the antinatalism. Sorry, some people are very suffering focused, and others are
Mm,
very life focused. So
yeah,
naturally, the ones who are more inclined to suffering reduction, will be, or probably already antinatalists, or are antinatalists without declaring that they are antinatalists or really know the term. Um, it's the challenges with the people who became vegans or animal rights activists because they kind of cherish life. Um, but I think there is a great potential in these kind of people as well, because exactly because they cherish life and they see how disvalued the lives of non-human animals are by human tyranny, their emotional intuition, their incentive, their sympathy is set that they don't want people to create more humans who will be more tyrants to non-human animals. So there's not really a contradiction, only on the deeper levels. But practically, I think these kind of people will also be at least sympathetic to antinatalism because they don't want to create more victimizers, because they highly relate emotionally to the victims. So I think there is this incentive among the animal rights community. There is a great potential. I agree.
No, it's good to hear. So my second to last question is just do either of you have plans for the future when it comes to antinatalism? And if so, what are they? Haran, do you want to go first? I know you said that you're planning on moving more into politics, and so you may have to be less open about antinatalism. But do you have any plans at all for antinatalism in the future?
Well, as you said, the more I'm involved with politics, the less I would like to express my views about antinatalism, not in a direct way at least. I still openly talk about the crisis of that population growth will bring. So I don't think I need to speak specifically about antinatalism. I can speak about suffering and suffering reduction without bringing antinatalism. I can speak about being child-free, and I can speak about animal suffering and veganism. I suppose I have already reduced the amount that I dare speak about antinatalism. But that's okay. I think I still intend to take a stance to reduce suffering in Israel and worldwide, and that's what I try to do through the organization I'm part of and through political movements I support. I don't know if I have much else to say about the matter. But I do hope that, I don't know, if I will have the opportunity to directly speak about antinatalism, I do think that it is the highest moral position humans can have. It is the highest and the final moral positions humans can have as a collective. Because once we have accepted this, we will bring about the end of suffering.
Yeah, no, I think like your pursuit of suffering reduction that is in alignment with antinatalism is a noble venture. So I hope that like your future endeavors, even if they're not specifically on antinatalism, go well, because I think they will only serve to improve the state of the world regardless. Nimrod, what about you? Do you have any plans for the future regarding antinatalism?
First of all, a little short note about something that Haran said. I think it's not okay. It's great. It's great that there will be someone like him with these perceptions and positions in all kinds of political positions that can really affect policy. That's amazing. I really hope that he will succeed and will advance suffering reduction and population reduction. So there is room for all there's more than room, there is a need for all kinds of positions and places along the line of critical thinking and activism and social change and suffering reduction. So it's amazing. I really hope that you will succeed, Haran. As for me and the Israeli antinatalism movement, well, it's currently still a one-man operation, basically. 4 people have joined me to activities. 3 of them are animal rights activists, who who are also antinatalists, obviously, and they wanted to figure out. They were curious how advocacy for antinatalism, uh, how does it work to talk to people on the streets that procreation is morally wrong. I'm really glad that they came, and I hope they will join me in the future. Another person that is not in the animal rights circles, I think, I guess it's the person that you mentioned earlier, Lawrence, and he is the guy that translated your great handbook into Hebrew. And so
Yeah.
this is a maybe it's an opportunity to tell him that he did a great job, and I'm really glad he did it. And so
Mm.
uh, that was great. And that's it. That's more or less
Mm.
sums the people who joined me. So I'm acting more or less alone. So obviously my first goal and aspiration is to broaden the movement, that people will join me on a regular basis. And I want to do the sort of street activism and grassroots activism similar to what Stop Having Kids are doing.
Mm.
Um, but currently, because I'm alone, I don't really have the option. Um,
Yeah.
but one person can do quite efficient things. Besides the information stands and standing in the street with signs and talking to people, I have joined environmental conferences and marches and gay parades, and walking around in gay parades with signs like "Make love, not babies." And
Mm.
another sign, I carried with me two signs. Another one is oral and anal is more ecological. Where yeah, that reflects the responses. People really love these signs, and I was really surprised.
Yeah.
And it's not the compliments are not for me. It's the gay
Yeah. Yeah.
community that should get the compliments, which is so open and were so supportive of
Mm.
the signs and the message. That was amazing. I joined 4 gay parades, and it was great in all of them. Many people
Mm.
took pictures and like supported me, and really it was really very uplifting. And it was in the beginning of my activity, so. Um, um, I don't remember I got into this point that you can do effective things by yourself, but obviously I need more people and more angles, more ideas, obviously. So currently I want more people to join me and to do more or less the things that I'm doing now, only much better.
Mm. Yeah. Well, you mentioned someone who translated the handbook that I manage. Um, and I won't, obviously mention his name or anything because he would prefer to stay private. But I think he deserves a mention in a video about antinatalism in Israel. There are people who work in the background who don't necessarily have a public presence, but they do a lot of work to further antinatalism in Israel. And there are many people like that around the world. So obviously, um, he will know who he is. And I will send this video to him so he'll see this video. But yeah,
Okay.
he's done a lot of work. So obviously, I won't use your name, but thank you for all the work you've done. Um, and yeah, my final question is just how can people stay up to date with you if you would like them to? So I don't obviously Nimrod, you have your social media channels and the YouTube channel and stuff. Haran, I don't know if you have any sort of public presence that people can follow you somewhere
Well,
to keep up to
you
date with what
can
you're doing.
find me on Facebook if you want.
Okay, cool. Well, what I can do is I can link your Facebook and Nimrod. I can link anywhere that you'd like me to link people to. But is there anywhere specific, Nimrod, that you would like to mention people to go and visit?
Yeah. Before this interview, I tried to translate all the materials in the website. It's don'tprocreate.org into English.
Right.
So I've
Yep.
translated the 10 arguments, the 10 main arguments for
Yep.
antinatalism. And every week I'm uploading into social media one pro-natalist excuse and the way I'm trying to tackle it. So I've translated around 30, and they're already online.
Yep.
So you can find it in don'tprocreate.org. There is in the upper left side of the website there is a button called with the word English. So click on it, and
Yep.
you can see most of the materials is translated, and I will finish in I hope in a week or so. So there is the website and the Facebook page, which it would be great if you can add in the description. It's called the Israeli Antinatalism movement. My personal Facebook page it's not really personal. It's devoted to antinatalism advocacy almost solely, and it's antinatalism in 3 words. It's N as AN in capital letters, T in capital letters, and natalism in lowercase. And besides that, as you mentioned, there is a YouTube channel that I just recently uploaded 4 videos of conversations in the streets with people just stopping and having a conversation with me. And I translated them into English so people can read the subtitles. And that's basically it.
Yeah. Well, I'll link everything below so people don't have to go and find it. They can just click a link and be taken to it. But thanks so much both for giving up your time to come and do this this video, and also for the work both of you have done on antinatalism and will continue to do in the future. It's been really nice talking to you, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Lawrence.